talk to me about, you said this has been quite a year personally and professionally. What changed for you, and how do you think that shaped your tone and honesty as you move forward?
Ugh, where to begin, right? There's so many layers, I think, for so many of us as we look at what 2025 has been. And coming into this year, it was going to be my 6th year of self-employment. And I had a whole bunch of projects lined up in December that were going to hit in the first quarter of the year. And I was excited, but I was kind of walking the balance many of us who work for ourselves walk, which is it going to be too much? Is it, am I crossing over the threshold? Am I going to need to hire some help? So I was just trying to figure out how I was going to tackle that work. And then January hit, the inauguration happened. A bunch of the work, even if it wasn't connected to, I do a lot of work in Washington, but a lot of stuff that wasn't even remotely connected to DC. I think everyone this year, we can say even here in September, has been kind of circumspect.
Hi everyone, Matt Harrington here, and welcome back to another episode of Direct Application, where hopefully we're turning leadership theory into everyday action for you all. Today's conversation centers on the big question we ask in every episode. How do we directly apply all these great leadership theories we keep hearing about and best practices to real-world situations? How that Monday morning week starts, and how do we take what we've talked about and apply it directly? This episode, we want to explore a little bit more around authentic leadership and what that actually looks like, especially when we talk about high stakes and high pressure that we're all dealing with in the current climate. My guest today is someone whose work I've admired from afar, but also up close. I've worked with her in the past. I love watching her on her socials. Cat O'Shaughnessy Coffrin, or as we like to call her, Cat. She's founder of CaptivatingCo, an executive communications consultancy, helping companies and leaders translate strategy into story and authenticity into impact. Cat is a consultant, strategist, writer who's partnered with some of the biggest names in the business world, from Bayer to Starbucks to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She's helping guide executives, founders, and C-suite teams through everything from personal branding and brand positioning all the way to internal communication and storytelling. She's also a published thought leader, not only on LinkedIn, where we're going to talk a little bit about that in the interview, but some pretty big names too: Fast Company, Business Insider, the Business Journals, Medium, and more. She unpacks the human side of leadership, culture, and communication. If you do have the chance to follow her on LinkedIn, she brings a pretty raw, vulnerable, and refreshingly honest take on what it really looks like to lead while living through life's messiness. Today, we'll explore how leaders can show up authentically without losing focus, credibility, or themselves in the process. We'll talk about personal brand, some fearless leadership tips, the limits of the purpose-driven workplace, and what it really means to lead on Monday morning. I really hope you enjoyed the interview. Let's take it away. Hi, Cat. Welcome to the Direct Application. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Matt. It's good to see you.
Cool. So as we were preparing, you and I had a prep call, so I'm going to reference a couple of the notes from our prep call. But as we were going through that prep call, you kind of said to me, this has been quite a year. And if people haven't been following, I recommend go over to Kat's LinkedIn page, follow her. The reason I got you on the show, the reason why I find it just so interesting, we've known each other for quite some time, but I was just like, quite frankly, blown away by the stuff that you were posting on LinkedIn. So we'll get into a little bit of what that looked like. But talk to me about, you said this has been quite a year personally and professionally. What changed for you, and how do you think that shaped your tone and honesty as you move forward?
Where to begin, right? There's so many layers, I think, for so many of us as we look at what 2025 has been. And coming into this year, it was going to be my 6th year of self-employment. And I had a whole bunch of projects lined up in December that were going to hit in the first quarter of the year. And I was excited, but I was kind of walking the balance many of us who work for ourselves walk, which is it going to be too much? Is it, am I crossing over the threshold? Am I going to need to hire some help? So I was just trying to figure out how I was going to tackle that work. And then January hit, the inauguration happened. And a bunch of the work, even if it wasn't connected to, I do a lot of work in Washington, but a lot of stuff that wasn't even remotely connected to DC. I think everyone this year, we can say even here in September, has been kind of circumspect. I don't remember if we talked, I don't know how your business flow has been impacted, but I'm hearing this anecdotally. I started my business during COVID, and I often say that it was actually not a terrible time to be striking out on your own, because back then, and the circumspect we saw in 2020, when everyone was kind of not sure how the pandemic was going to affect the economy, was that people were more comfortable hiring independent consultants than maybe large, expensive, ongoing projects. So I really benefited from that. There's a personal nature when it's just you. They don't feel like you're hiking up prices to cover your overhead, which I know worked in an agency. Clients would sometimes accuse us of that. There's no smoke and mirrors when it's just you. They know where their money's going. They know how much money you're making. And I benefit from that. I thrive in that. This year, I think it's been a slightly different flavor of that pause and hesitation in the economy. And people just weren't sure. The tariffs came on really quickly, and then they were canceled. And we're still seeing lots of fluctuation in the marketplace. No one really knows who the winners and losers are, which industries are going to succeed, which companies are going to succeed. So everyone's just going to hang on to their money. So that was actually the way the year started for me. Is I had 4 big projects. I was a little bit worried it was too much. And then I think 3 of them went on pause. All of them ended up hitting, but they kind of hit around like May, June, July. Suddenly my summer was really busy. Then my August was slow. So when you work for yourself, you're used to this kind of up and down. Ever since I struck it on my own, I've always had enough business, and I've been really grateful for that. And I hustle and I go get it. I work my network, but also there was this uncertainty that came with the start of the year that I was not prepared for. So when I was mentioning that to you, I think I was reflecting a little bit on that. Okay. I'm looking at my numbers now. I'm talking to my financial advisors. I think I'm probably still going to have a pretty good year. Last year was my best year of business ever. This year I'll probably have a third best year. I don't know. But it's been painful to weather the ups and downs. And then, as you know, as my friend, I also am going through divorce right now. We're about a week and a half from getting final. We're getting along really well. We like to think we're going to get a trophy for being the best people at ever doing this in the state of Vermont. And the kids have been wonderful and are benefiting from that as well. But bringing those 2 pieces together, and again, to go back to the personal aspect of working for yourself, it's near impossible, I think, to shield some of those personal changes happening in your life from the work that you do, because I don't know how you show up to a workshop, or I had a strategic planning project workshop this summer with a really wonderful client. This is my 2nd annual version of doing this with them, went on their leadership retreat, and a lot had changed in a year. And I remember thinking, do I say something? Do I not? But they had seen me talking about it on LinkedIn. So they all knew, and they were very interested to talk about it, because we're all human and we don't really get anywhere by shielding that part of our humanity. Obviously, you have to be responsible with it. Yeah. But those 2 big layers, I think, on the business side, the uncertainty, and also just the massive upheaval on my personal life, as positive as it really has been, as wonderful as I could have even hoped for, frankly, has created a lot of uncertainty. And where you find me here on, September 17th, I'm looking around myself, staring down Q4 and thinking, it's really shifted my mindset.
Really? Okay.
And I have become much more comfortable with not being able to control exactly what's ahead, and trusting. And I think we earn this. You and I were talking earlier about turning 40. You're not there yet. I don't want to. Almost. I'm past. Proudly so. But one thing that happens, I think, is we've earned the right to trust the cycles in our life, even the unpredictable ones. And as my therapist said to me the other day, even though a cat will always land on its feet, if you actually watch a cat fall, it's not a very graceful process. And I think I've come to terms with the fact that all that the cat, and in this case, me being the cat, can really do is just commit to the outcome, know the outcome's going to be okay. Trust it, because I've got 42 years of life experience telling me it will. And do a whole bunch of hard work to navigate every single obstacle that pops up to make sure that it happens. And it's just a profound mindset shift for me. So that's a long answer to your question.
Well, that's it. That's the interview. Okay. So you've gone through everything and all my questions. Good to see you.
Pleasure doing business. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so we are going to absolutely I'm not going to let you off that easy. We're going to shift into a lot of the things you just talked about. I really just don't, I'm going to pull out keywords that I thought maybe the audience just wants to pay attention to as well. You talked about sharing, you talked about authenticity, and we're going to get to some of that. But you talked about it being responsible sharing. And I like that part. So audience members, think about that as you think about oversharing sometimes, or this is such an environment and a climate sometimes that we talk about authenticity and bringing your real self to work. There's some caveats to that being responsible. I know you're going to talk a little bit about that. So you do have this thriving consulting business, and you're also trying to navigate real life. I referenced it earlier, so I want to dig into a little bit more. You've been sharing some pretty vulnerable personal stories on LinkedIn, and you mentioned divorce, but I've thought the job exit and even parenting. And interestingly, maybe it's the LinkedIn algorithm, maybe it's just that people love listening to you. You are a pretty funny person on LinkedIn. I'm always like, could I go there? Could I go that far? I'm like, I don't think I'm as funny as Cat. She's just and it's just kind of tongue in cheek. And I've actually sent a lot of people to your page because I truly do appreciate it. But what's interesting, and you and I were talking about it before, is that vulnerability, that authenticity, that true sharing has actually led to an increased engagement for you. And I think you threw out some numbers. You used to have 5,000 followers, and then it grew like to 17,000 since December 2024. So only within less than a year. Why do you think people are following you more? Why do you think people, my understanding, and I think you talked about it, is that you are getting greater engagement. You are finding more ROI from sharing personal stories. Why do you think that is?
I have a couple of theories on that. I have been active on LinkedIn for, I don't know when I joined, for well over a decade. But when I left my old firm and I went out on my own, coming up on 6 years ago, I've been writing pretty much daily since then. And so it's been a living experiment, like I think many of us, not to mention a lot shifting and changing as we're all trying to figure it out as we go. And in the beginning, I was just using it to kind of so many people say to me, our careers are designed to take us further away from who we really are, rather than make us feel more connected to our true selves. And at first that might feel incongruent, but it actually makes a lot of sense, because to be a good leader, especially to thrive in a corporate environment, we actually really value conformity. Mm-hmm. You step up into, I was a managing director at a global marketing firm. It's part of my job to represent the business, both internally and externally, in the interest of the business and the voice of the business. And that's where I think some of that rub is, because we could hypothesize different people, I think, are more vulnerable to this in different settings. It's more pronounced. But when we evolve beyond just thinking of a job as like a transactional contract, which at its essence it is, and start really thinking about, and you and I've talked about purpose-driven business and mission-oriented organizations and things like that, especially those of us in the elder millennial category, we get a lot of satisfaction out of our job, and our identity becomes so conflated with our job. I also grew up professionally in DC, where that's quite common. And it's not because there's anything wrong with people in DC. It's because we're so passionate and driven to do something, and our job is our vehicle for that. So I don't fault anybody for this. But what's happening is you're starting to have a lot of this identity crisis. So as I've struck out on my own, I use LinkedIn to sort of say, what is it that I have to say now that I'm unbound from a corporate identity, which is a more positive spin on what I hear from a lot of my clients, which is I'm having an identity crisis because I don't know who I am anymore. And it started out with that. And over time, as I look at how it evolved, for a while, it was just a lot of platitudes, which is why LinkedIn gives that kind of cringe feel and I think justified criticism a lot of the time. And then sometime last fall, I started writing a little bit more about some really visceral things that I have seen in my work. I interview leaders about their entire career trajectory, and I hear about a lot of mistreatment.
Right.
And like any human who's been in a job, I've experienced some of that myself. And I started writing about it because I realized that I had this platform now, that I had the opportunity to say the things that nobody says out loud. And when I started to hit on and started to see like I was hitting a nerve, every time I said something that people don't feel like they're allowed to say when they're employed, it really started there. And I started to get a lot of anonymous messages from people, some who I knew, some who I didn't, but they'd be direct messaging, or some people I knew would text me instead of like commenting on LinkedIn saying, what you said resonated and you make me feel like I'm not crazy. Because we don't talk about this stuff for a lot of reasons. We're not necessarily, when you're employed, you don't feel like you have the upper hand. You're allowed to talk about poor treatment, involuntary exits, the way that people are treated on their way out the door, the way they feel ghosted when they're laid off, all of the shame that comes with that, a lot of those topics. So I started writing about that. And I think as part of that, I started to become much more emboldened in writing about some other stuff. So instead of just this content that was generally, here's 5 ways to define your personal brand, which people liked, and I got business, I started to sprinkle some of those in. As you know, I started to go further and further, and I'm coming up here next month in October on my 43rd birthday. And I remember on my 42nd birthday, I'd made a promise to myself that I would publish an essay. I started to feel like I'd kind of started to stretch the bounds of what I could really say on LinkedIn. And so I wrote this essay on Medium, and I found I just had a lot of this. I was obviously exploring and finding my voice. And I wrote an essay about my parents. Both of my parents have passed away, and about the things that we don't feel like we can say out loud, which is that the process of watching both of my parents in 2 very different situations decline was so brutal that I fantasized about them dying. And so I wrote an essay called It's Okay to Wish for Death. And this was not at all about work, but this was a story. And my job is helping people tell their stories, work included, but also life. And for years and years, while I was waiting for my parents to die, I felt trapped, like I couldn't find the right words. And I think so much of my work is about helping people find the exact right words. It's eating. And so I wrote this essay and I published it, and that sort of was a different layer. So here I am talking about like saying the unsaid things about workplace culture because I can, and because people are resonating with it. Saying this thing about, the realities of your parents dying. I wrote another essay about when death and life converge, and how I was 6 weeks pregnant when my dad died, cleaning out his house. It was very gruesome. And giving his eulogy, with my toddler holding my hand, and just thinking about the ways these things connect. And then the other element that happened, which I think is really important, is I started to be funnier. So I love you mentioning that, because one thing that started, I started to connect with some people who were sort of interesting to seeing them out there. And I remember once last October, I grabbed a photo of James Vanderbeek on Dawson's Creek, like one of the famous ones of him crying.
Yeah.
And the post, I still remember, it was about how it's so easy as leaders to tell everyone on our team, like if you experience a death, or if something's going hard, like take the day, take some time, process it. We're very generous with others. But how the day that my mom died, I got up the next morning and I joined all my Zoom calls. Yeah. Literally the next day, and I worked for myself. And I could not give myself that permission. And the point I was making was that was what I looked like on my Zoom calls. I'd be like, hey, Matt, full disclosure, my mom died last night, but I wanted to, and all my clients were like, what are you doing?
Yeah, right.
And somebody like commented on that. And suddenly I started to share my sense of humor more, which is a huge part of how I lead. It's how I facilitate. It's always been a part of my persona. And what I found is, and something that's hard for people to remember, and I think get their head around when they don't use LinkedIn much, is it's the whole tapestry. It's the fact that one day I can write something like bitingly sarcastic. The next day I can write something completely earnest. And the next day I might write about something that's going on in the world because I feel compelled to do so. And a lot of that connects to business. And then the next day I might write about how to define your personal brand. And you have a chance to kind of show this well-rounded version of who you are. And that's where I think I really started to see this break open. And like you mentioned, last December, I remember I hit 5,000 followers in early December. And that felt like a milestone to me. And now I'm actually about to hit 18,000 this week. Great. I'm thinking about once you start letting yourself be and not taking yourself too seriously, people listen to the most serious things you say in a different way.
Yeah. Are you finding any tips or tricks, but you don't have to give it all away, but like you're talking about writing multiple ways, multiple times, is kind of that the standard for LinkedIn? Like, hey, if I could write 4 times a week, and I'm going to kind of, to some degree, be more human, and also what moves me that day. So I might be sarcastic that day and I might have a post, I'm going to post it. And I might also have, so do you find that there's without overusing the term algorithm, do you have a cat algorithm that you're like, yeah, I try and punch in every 2 or 3 days, or how does that manifest for you?
Yes, and what works for me is probably not what would work for everybody. I write multiple times a day. There's a whole lot of people on LinkedIn ready to sell you advice that doesn't make sense. Even LinkedIn's own advice is actually not what most of us who use LinkedIn have found anecdotally.
Yeah.
So be careful who you listen to would be my first suggestion. I'm going to answer that in two ways. One is what I do with my clients, and I have a writing guide that is helpful for people who are trying to figure out how to open up their minds. It's free, and I will send the link to you in case you want to share that on my website that people can download just to help you kind of like start thinking, because people feel very paralyzed when they're first starting out until they kind of get a rhythm. So if you're just trying to figure that out, when I talk about this tapestry that I just mentioned, I typically will help a client think in terms of threes. I always think in terms of threes. So if we think about Matt, we don't even need to think about a thesis. The prevailing wisdom used to be like 5 to 10 years ago, I want to be known as this on LinkedIn, and that's all I'm going to write about. So boring. So instead, allowing yourself to think maybe there's one column that's about the stuff that matters to me most personally. And a lot of that's purpose, like what ultimately drives you and motivates you in your life. It's the same brand that applies to or principle that applies to corporate branding. When I stand in rooms of leaders all around the world and I ask about brands that they really feel connected to, every room says Patagonia. Somebody says Patagonia. And we all know what's ultimately driving Patagonia, and they're very transparent about it. And the same principle applies to a person. If I understand what's really behind your asks, I'm going to be much more inclined to A, root you on, B, listen to what you have to say, and C, trust you, right? And connect with you. So that's why the personal piece connects, but it doesn't mean that you have to write about your dying parents.
Right.
It could be about your child winning a cross-country race, which I wrote about the other day. And everybody has some version of sports that they love to connect with. Anyway, so there's the personal, and then there's one piece that's maybe about why you do what you do. We all have an area of skill set that we really lean into, and it's not necessarily about what the skill set is, but ultimately what's so exciting about your job. I am always asking my clients to help me fall in love with what they do. A famous example I love to share is I worked with a woman a couple of years ago, a big personality from Louisiana. I just loved her, but she was a chief compliance officer in a healthcare system. And I have worked in healthcare and I worked with compliance, and I was like, how on earth am I going to be excited about what she does? And she really made me fall in love with it because she helped me understand her approach to it and what she finds compelling about it. And I love asking the same thing out of scientists because I don't understand science, and helping people understand which field of science they chose is a wonderful question. It's so interesting. So write about that. Share with people why you do what you do. It's so much more interesting than what you know. And then the third piece might be about how you do it. And that's where you can get it a little bit. And I've seen you share some great stuff on guides and things that I think could be really valuable for some of the smaller businesses that I know that you get in your orbit and bigger businesses. So breaking things apart into those 3 pillars is a great way to start to think, okay, maybe I'll write 3 times this week. I'm going to pick one from each category. Yeah. You get it going. I write whenever things strike me. The other piece of advice that I was going to share is the best way to kill your content, and I'm sure people would disagree. Maybe you'll disagree. I think the best way to kill your content is to write it all in advance on a different document and then drop it into LinkedIn, because it will feel like a mini press release.
Yeah.
Yes, you might want to shape it. I keep a notes app where I'll be out walking my dog and I'll be like, oh, I should write about this. And I might make a note. But what I always do is I open the dialogue box and it makes me feel like I'm standing on a stage giving a presentation.
Okay.
My favorite thing to do. And then I write it in the moment with whatever mood I'm feeling. And I might have the bare bones of what I wanted to say. Here's a repeat that I love to do. I love to write a post about just words I'm loving. I was listening to PR the other day and somebody used the word aegis, and I stopped, pulled over and wrote it down. And I was like, God, I love that word. And every now and then I'll write a post about words that I love, so I'll make little notes to myself, and then I sit down and I might shape a post about it. I'll pick whatever post or photo that I might want to attach to it. Sometimes ironically, photos that have nothing to do with it, because we all know photos help the algorithm. But my point is, when you remove that barrier and you actually open the dialogue box, what you're doing psychologically is you're reminding yourself that you're in dialogue with people, and people will respond better to that kind of content.
Yeah. I warned audiences already. She's bold, everybody. She's bold. She's writing in real time in the dialogue box of LinkedIn. We sent a couple questions back and forth, but I didn't put this in. So a little bit of probably not a curveball for you, but do you find that the writing is healing you? You find that when you write about your parents, is it cathartic? Is it with like your therapist? Because I'm a big believer in journaling in some way, shape, or form. I believe that writing, or however you're going to express yourself, we keep so much stuff upstairs, and we think that while we're thinking through it, we are actually thinking through it or feeling through it or whatever. And I find that a lot of writing, whether that be professionally building your understanding of your art and your work, or personally, you're waking up every morning, do you find that writing on LinkedIn or wherever, Notes app, that has been healing in the last year for you?
I mean, I could have paid you to ask me that question. Yes, I think we share philosophy on that 100%. And I have to just diverge a little bit here. Where a lot of this actually started was in April of 2022, my mom passed away. She had dementia, she had MS. It was a really long, drawn out death where she was not present for years. And so when she finally died, I thought I would have this like sense of release from sitting around watching. It's an experience many of us can relate to, like watching someone's quality of life diminish while they're still here. I lived across the country from her. I flew out all the time, but it was just like painful every time I went, trying to figure out what's the right way to be the right daughter. She wouldn't want me to give up my life. So I just had to endure. And that's all while building a family, moving to Vermont, having children, everything, and a job. So she dies in April of 2022. And I thought that I had grieved so much. Anticipatory grief is what they call it. Maybe you went through that too.
Scheduled grief. I love it.
I had it on my calendar. No, and
this is what I'm going to mourn today.
I thought I'd already checked that box and I could just be free. And instead, I was in such shock at how painful the end was. So I got a new therapist. I worked with her for like 10 months. I was so ready. Therapists come along at different times when you're ready for different things. She helped me learn about my nervous system and slow down. A lot of professionals, especially very accomplished senior level professionals, are very adept at operating in kind of a fight or flight mode. And those of us who maybe have some childhood trauma where that was a comfortable space for us tend to seek out high anxiety jobs where there's a fight or flight. So over the course of the summer after my mother passed away, this therapist helped me understand how to slow down so that I could actually feel the feelings that I felt like I was not able to access. I share that because it was so profound and it changed me in such a way that next fall, I said to that therapist, I feel this creative urge where my grief has been to write and to share about it because I can see it and understand it so much more clearly. And for years, part of my pain was that I couldn't articulate it. I hated when people said the wrong thing. My mom would recover and it was so painful to get back into the cycle again. And I'd be like, no, don't congratulate me. There's nothing wonderful about this moment. And suddenly I had the words to explain how nuanced and hard and complex that was. And so I did a book called The Artist's Way. Are you familiar with this?
No, I haven't.
Oh, put it on your list. And it's a 90-day book kind of program. People swear by this book. Once you learn about it, you'll hear about it everywhere. And I did morning pages every morning in January through March of 2023. And I was just kind of like, what is it that I want to create? And ultimately that led me to this idea to make a audio documentary podcast. And what I did is I identified all the questions and unreconciled things that I wanted to process about my two parents and things that didn't make sense about my childhood. And then I interviewed 17 people who knew them, asked these questions. I found my mom's estranged sister, my dad's college roommate. I recorded it all and I took a sabbatical for the first time in my life that summer for 3 months. I found a guy in Underhill who taught me how to edit audio for 1 hour. It was like for dummies. And I found music and I turned it into 6-chapter series about everything I learned.
Yes, I've shared that before. Yep.
It's called Lost and Found audio documentary. And it was such a healing process. And I later had someone in my life look at my star chart, which I don't understand, but I actually think the older I get, the more that I believe. And she said, you are someone who not only values and needs to examine your life, which you and I clearly share that. Not everybody does.
Yep.
But she was like, you also have this very strong need to share what you've learned. So for me, more than others, I really need. So yes, I'm processing and healing in public, and that is not for everybody. And you shouldn't do it if it doesn't come naturally to you or if you're not quite sure why.
Yeah.
But for anyone who ever has, and I know you've shared some stuff. I remember when you shared about your mom passing away. So sorry.
Yep.
And watching when you share, you're giving people an opportunity to connect back with you. And it's not just about you.
Sure. Yeah.
Because they're so grateful that you shared that, especially in a professional space, because we're all bringing it all with us to work too.
Yeah.
Right? We know it, but we forget it because we take ourselves so seriously.
Do you find, so I kind of went through similar things. I went through maybe 2 rounds of therapy throughout my 30s, and one really helped me get to kind of a certain point. The second one was a lot around the nervous system that you were referencing, and I got really fascinated with the neuroscience of like leadership. And I was like, could I interview my therapist for my leadership? Like, how can, and I never even thought of, wow, when we talk about conflict resolution, we're talking about the A, B's, and C's of conflict resolution. And you're like, have we ever talked about like the fact that you have an upstairs, a middle room, and a downstairs, and like you're going to first have the physical reaction, then you're going to have the relational reaction, then maybe you're going to get to the reasonable reaction. And so it was just fascinating to me. So then I went down this whole journey of like looking at executive leadership programs that involve neuroscience. And so it's interesting that you say that. Someday you and I will do I feel like some type of project where we go, it is so important for you to bring your whole human self to work. And hopefully it's a positive experience. And hopefully you are, I don't want to say a healed human, but you are, you kind of have a general bent of, I've gone through some wars, I've gone through some battles, but like, I know how to bring myself to work. And yet we don't talk a lot about that, especially in training and consulting, about the human part, the mind part, the psychological part, even the emotional part of saying, hey, when change happens, like a death of a parent, like a new child, like anything you talk about in your therapy, why don't we bring that to our retreats when we're doing leadership retreats? So I do want to kind of thread that line, Kat, and kind of bring us back around to some of the work that you are working on. But I think I want to talk about it big picture, because you and I have talked about how the C-suite, I know you've been working with a lot of executives. How do you, knowing all that you know, knowing all that we just shared, how do you thread that line between bring your whole self to work, Mr., Mrs. Senior Executive, but also being responsible about what you do share and what you do bring to work?
I obviously, like most things, it's a nuanced answer that's going to be so conditional on environment and person. But what I do find repeatedly is that in the personal brand exploration work I do with senior leaders, there's a lot of healing and recovery that has to be done. You know, it might manifest in a way that you wake up one day and you're like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And you don't know where to begin. And so my approach tends to go back to, I interview them about their entire life story. And I don't want to say, we don't start with just where does your story begin? Where were you born? I actually want to know kind of like what was going on in a family unit before you were born, because these are the forces that shaped us.
Sure.
And then as we talk and I interview people, and then the second interview is they're into a deep dive into everything they learned in their career and their career story and their journey. You start to see these patterns that just don't think about on it. They're buried. You know, you kind of have to jar them loose and examine them with the help of somebody. And oftentimes when you do that in that one fell swoop in that way, you can start to see how something that happened to you yesterday or a decision that you're grappling with right now is connected to something that was formative to you when you were 8 or 12, right? Or even the reason that you chose a certain major. And it's all about like consistently looking at what motivates us. I do think, you know, corporate America is singularly excellent at taking compelling ideas and driving them into the ground and turning them into meaningless platitudes. So I'm saying all this acknowledging that. You know, when we talk about authenticity, it's a little bit about that. When we talk about self-awareness, I do think corporate America has made some steps. There's a lot. I'm a huge believer in strength finders and any kind of like, you know, Enneagram, which I don't really understand, but I know is transformative for people. A lot of my work is about that. But what's different, and circles back to answering your question, is what do you do with that? How do you use that to show up in a certain way? The hardest thing for the leaders I work with is for them to articulate to me what their goals are. But oftentimes they fall in a handful of categories. I want to be seen in a certain way. For a lot of us, there's a gap that exists between how we think we're perceived and how we want to be known, because it connects to wanting to be considered for opportunities, et cetera. Or maybe they just want to crystallize how they define what they're good at or what they want to do. Sometimes people just want to answer, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And so those are a lot of the kinds of things that they're trying to do or achieve. And so we take this self-awareness and the language that comes with it when you examine these things about yourself, and we apply them to what it is they're trying to achieve. So it's not just about bringing your whole self to work. It's about why do you need to bring more of yourself to work, and how do you figure out the right balance for your goals? So I will give a quick example. I worked with a finance executive at a large global firm this year, and she was an immigrant and a woman of color. And these are a lot of the people that I tend to work with. I think because of the approach that I take creates sort of a safe space for them that's really valued. And she'd worked at the same company for 25 years. She did not want to say a single thing about her personal life. And she also wanted to create more trust because they'd gone through a series of M&A activity. And she was new to the C-suite. So she wanted to show up in a slightly different, more visionary way, not always akin to a CFO type role. And so I helped her come up with really tangible, specific, more comfortable ways. She had to do like an introduction of herself to the entire organization. And we fought over it. But she had told me this beautiful thing about how she was a mother of I want to say 3 boys, and they were all raised and grown. And the way she made a nice parallel between what it was like to raise 3 boys and wrangle people from a financial perspective, wrangle creatives.
What?
Right? Yeah. And I thought, would you be willing to just show a picture of the boys in your introduction to the company and say, I've been here for 25 years. I've raised 3 boys, and I like to joke that has taught me everything I need to know about doing my job as a CFO here.
Yep.
And she was willing to say that. And she told me that she got like countless messages from people because they were like, I had no idea. Or what a great point. And just the tiniest sliver or giving up of something, it doesn't mean that we're out here trauma dumping. There's become this kind of like negative binary of either you're closed off and you're professional or you're way too open and you're trauma dumping. And that's such an oversimplification.
That's great. Okay, I want to take that. So let's look at it through the other side, because you and I have talked about that lens too, which is we're trying to create companies with so much meaning and purpose and believing in that mission. And you said something to me recently that was like, purpose can be weaponized. And that stuck with me. And I want to go through that a little bit. How can leaders walk that line? I especially think of nonprofits, right? Because we're very cause-based. And I've done work with nonprofits. I'm at a nonprofit, and I know how to twinge those heartstrings so people are working 12 hours a day, show up for the festival. So like that's part of our ace is we may not be making money over here, but we know how to get volunteers and workers working, but there's a danger to that. And so walk me through the other lens where we might find a C-suite of leaders or strategists who say, hey, this is a great way where we can get Gen Z and millennials. And we see that, I think, especially with Gen Y and millennials, that there really is this burnout specifically for that group. And I think maybe Gen X was already so shut off and transactional that they're like, whatever, I don't go to happy hours. I just go home to my family. And Gen Z is just kind of a BS reader. We're going to see how that all shapes up. But you've got this middle group that I remember the writings. I remember 2008 and I remember the emergence of social media and how that was going to topple down corporations and really bring everybody to a level playing field of being able to share and connect. And so there are a lot of this transformative stuff that was happening in the corporate world in the 2010s about, even Barack Obama, right? Really having a candidate that speaks to you. But there's danger to that. And so speak to that concept of purpose being weaponized, and then talk to me through how you work with senior leaders to say there's a balance there, there's a responsibility there.
That's a big question. I have a couple thoughts. One reason that I do the work that I do is that we spend a lot of time in the corporate world doing like 360 reviews, right? And trying to figure out how we can change ourselves. I am part of the school of thought, similar to like the strength minders type philosophy, which is that you should understand yourself well enough to know how to lean into your strengths. So the answer, of course, is not the same for every leader, because not every leader is an inspirer. Not every leader is great with the facts or the details, right? Not every leader comes to the table with the same thing. So first and foremost, it's up to you to at least be self-aware enough to know what's going to work for you and then lean into that. I have always been somebody since I was born that you can tell what I'm feeling by the look on my face. And that has worked for me and against me. I do think it creates a sense of trust because people don't have to wonder what's going on in my mind.
I'm married to one of those. I'm the opposite.
Are you?
You gotta dig into me because I'm generally going to be optimistic about everything, and then you got to really figure out. But
you almost have like that toxic positivity bent, maybe. But yeah, so I like, for better or worse, people know, and then I'm also pretty quick to just tell you how I feel, and so for me, what has worked is I'm pretty good at being very real, and also being able to be inspiring and bringing those two things together. Where I think I see things go off the rails is when you bring old paradigms of leadership, like command and control, into trying to be authentic. And what you cannot do today is be performative. To your point about Gen Z, they will smell that from a mile away. Gen X has never really cared. But that millennial base in the middle, which is really rising further and up in leadership, is not dumb, right? They're going to see through you. They're also going to do their research and they're going to figure out what you're not telling them. And so I think where a lot of these companies get it wrong is that they think, I love one topic that I love to share about that gets a lot of play every time is that this kind of phenomenon of companies that put a lot of energy into certifications and workplace awards, but they literally don't ever actually practice the hard stuff. The hardest stuff is to be able to say things like, if you've ever done change management communications inside of large companies, the natural leader tendency is to communicate less when you don't have anything you're allowed to say. Or someone gets laid off and you're not legally allowed to talk about what happened. But the answer is not to say nothing, because everybody will fill that silence with their own assumptions. The answer is to say, we are going to give you updates every week, even if there's no updates, because we want you to know that we're literally sharing as much as we legally can. We're all adults here. And also, we trust you, our colleagues and our employees, to know that even while shit's hitting the fan financially, we don't know what's going on in the marketplace, we're still committed to our purpose. And we're trying to find a way to stay to true north while we also put money into everybody's pockets. Like, we're not Little League, we're not all getting a trophy. And I think when you talk to people like the actual adult humans they are, if you have the ability to communicate in that way, people will actually be inspired by your honesty and earnesty approach. And I think there's a way to talk about the fact that in a purpose-driven business or a business-oriented nonprofit, that both things can live together. We tend to believe in our world that you can't be two seemingly conflicting things at once. And people are smart enough to know that, but maybe you need to remind them, communicate like a human. So you are my employee. I give you money in exchange for your job. And if anything happens, I'm going to have to let you go if our business falls apart. So I need your help to make sure it doesn't. And I also need you to be a living, thriving human. So we kind of got to figure this dance together. Also, I hope you believe the way that I do and our potential to impact change in the world. These things can live together if you're able to communicate about them. So my point about strengths and skill sets is that some people really can't communicate that way because some people are very stiff communicators. So don't let them be the one to say.
Well, it's the argument for having a diverse team. So if you are the idea is that you are opening your C-suite or your team to exercise one of those diverse. Somebody's a good communicator there. Somebody's a good storyteller, and also somebody's a realist. So adding them on. As we start to wind down the interview, Kat, I've got one main question left for you, and then we want to hit the lightning round. I love this one. I won't go into the details. I did this once when I was going through a bad breakup and kind of came out the other end of it. If you could write a love letter to yourself, and I picked this one because it's just kind of how you and I are talking and how we've talked and all your kind of the great stuff you've been sharing today. But if you could write a love letter to yourself, your younger self, let's say Cat at 22, you're just starting your career. What would you say? What are the truths that you would offer her? What would you reassure her about? What might you warn her against? How might you encourage her with trust? And probably most importantly, what do you think she needed to hear back then that you would share with her, but nobody else was saying back then? A lot there, but let's just say a love letter. And what might be you're a writer. What might you say? What might be the structure of that?
I actually feel like there's one theme that touches on all of that.
Okay.
And we sort of came up with this earlier, but when I was 22, I think like many 22-year-olds, I had gotten where I was by really knowing myself and trusting my instincts. I put myself through school. I moved across the country. I had studied abroad in South Africa. I got a great job and I was very driven. And at some point shortly after 22, I stopped working so hard to know myself. And I started listening to all the voices around me. And the definition of success that I started to chase was an externalized version instead of my own. And once you lose that connection with your inner voice, it's so, so hard, to the point of some of what we've been talking about, to get it back. Most of the leaders I work with today in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are struggling with that exact break and how to repair that connection. So what I would want 22-year-old Cat to know and do is to continue that relationship with herself, to fight against all of the voices outside of her that are going to tell her, no, you should want this. Because what's challenging about that is in your 20s and 30s, so many people are seeing potential in you and they're coming to you with like, have you thought about this? And that's great and wonderful and exciting. But if you're unmoored from your core, you're going to go anywhere anybody takes you. And then you're going to wake up one day and realize that you have no idea who you are anymore, which happened to me and happens to a lot of us. And so I'd really want her to stay connected to that voice, to keep writing, to do anything, all means necessary, to keep that integrity of self, of what she wants, what matters most for her as her world starts to open up. Then I think she would be less vulnerable, maybe, and more able to see through some of the stuff that you and I were just talking about.
Great. Awesome. I love it. Okay, so that's your homework. Go write that.
I feel like I should. Yeah.
Okay, lightning round. So quick answers on this one. We call this one the switch. What's a leadership idea you once believed in, but you have since outgrown? Yeah.
I'm going to say perfectionism,
okay,
fallibility, and the belief that leaders have to have all the answers.
Okay. Leadership anchor. When the work gets hard, loud, tough, noisy, what's your anchor? What do you go back to?
Well, frankly, to the point of the nervous system, the neuroscience of leadership, it's more of a physical thing.
Yeah.
I have to remind myself that if I get up and I go walk outside, that everything feels more manageable. That's really, and also at the end of the day, I really enjoy the work. And when it doesn't feel good, it's not the work that's the problem.
Yeah. Yep. I've run into that. Yep. All right. Somebody's listened to this interview. They loved it. They loved everything you said. What's the first thing they should do on Monday morning to directly apply what we've talked about today?
I am a fierce believer in free writing and writing prompts. And so I would love if somebody set aside the first half hour of their Monday instead of giving it to their job or even to exercise. And they sat down with a cup of coffee and they just wrote on one or two writing prompts. And I'm a font of writing prompts, and I have a bunch of them for free on my website. So I'll make sure to share that with you just to make it easier. But just that practice of coming to the page and restoring that connection with your inner voice, it's a muscle memory thing.
Yep. Perfect. All right. Last one. Call this read, listen, eat. What are you reading right now? What's on your bedstand, your porch, your coffee table? What are you listening to? What do you love to go jog or walk with? Audiobook, Spotify playlist. And then what are you eating? What's something you've either eaten lately or you love to cook that you might be able to share with the audience? So read, listen, eat.
Reading, I just finished a really terrible book for my book club called Frozen River. That's about, it's a historical fiction that takes place in Maine, and the character in it is really interesting, but the book was terrible. The other book I want to mention is How to Solve Your Own Murder, which is written by a friend of mine from childhood who lives in London, who is now a big celebrity author in the genre of cozy murder mystery, which is a big English. I think you're supposed to like drink your coffee next to the fireplace.
It kind of reminds me of like Knives Out, that kind of genre.
That kind of thing. I think even cozier, more little old ladies, maybe.
Yes.
But it's a series, and the third one in the series is about to come out. So I'm finishing up the second book in the series, which is How to Seal Your Own Fate. So that's the second one on my nightstand. My listen, I have been listening to a lot more political stuff, but the one that I want to mention that's bringing me joy is Good Hang with Amy Poehler.
Okay. Yep.
Oh my gosh. You have to listen to the Seth Meyers episode, Aubrey Plaza, and Cole Escola. Those are the three. You will be laughing so hard you're crying.
Okay.
And then food, the number one thing that's happening for me is my 11-year-old is now a pescatarian. And so I'm having to expand my horizons. And when
you help the audience, what is a pescatarian?
Okay. Vegetarian who eats fish.
Okay.
And so we have been experimenting with crumbled tofu, which has completely rocked my world. It's a new version of what you can do with tofu, which is replace any kind of ground meat that you might make. I like to make a lot of like gochujang, like Korean ground turkey or chicken bowls, and replacing it with crumbled tofu. And it is actually really fun to cook with.
There we go.
Even tacos.
That's the whole spectrum of Cat, everybody.
Yeah, that's it.
From the end, from tofu to crumble. Cat, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Good to talk to you, friend. Be well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you really enjoyed that interview. We got pretty personal there, and it was fun to go down that road a little bit with her. We'll be dropping the episode in the next couple of weeks. To our listeners, if you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and share. Make sure you think about maybe somebody you might want to share this episode with. This episode will be available on YouTube, my website, Spotify, Apple, and more. For more information about the show and those thoughts shared, visit harringtonbrands.com. We'll also have some of the things in the show notes that Kat referenced. As always, take what you've heard, make it your own, and apply it directly.